We'll pass it around. So just some quick comments before we, I'd like to actually see if the audience has any questions or comments. First of all, that, you know, the Internet of Things, we often thinking of sensor networks, things of that sort that might be used for gathering information. But it also, I think, especially if you talk about humanitarian applications, you know, we've got the ideas for infrastructure that can give us communication on a large scale anywhere, right? Potentially could use for, you know, disaster or humanitarian activities of various sorts. But the other side of it actually is with things that are on the ground, okay? And those ultimately are going to probably work with the things that most people have, and that's going to be consumer devices like this, which often don't have enough power. Mine right now is real low on power, so I have to keep it off. And that's got to be one of the big issues we're going to have in terms of being able to enable the Internet of Things to be used for humanitarian activities, is how do you provide power for these things? And actually in the Consumer Electronics Society, we have future directions. We've got a group that's talking about the idea of, you know, what are ways in which you can provide power for normal use of a device like this for a week's time without charging from proximity to a, without recharging it from proximity to a fixed power source. You know, and that's got to be a part of this too, because ultimately the stuff on the ground that people are going to have is going to be devices like this that they already have. And then we have to look at how can we then create not just these larger networks that can communicate up to the cloud, which is what he's talking about, and maybe doing that processing. But if we're going to be connecting to sensors and other things, we've got to do something that's called edge computing, you know, or where things are connected locally. And that's probably going to be using these things too, because it's the thing you're going to have. So these things are going to connect to devices and things that may help us for humanitarian activities, implementing these ideas in the Internet of Things. But the other side of it is we can also do some direct communication between these devices, for instance. But again, all this stuff is going to use power. So power's got to be a real important component of how we can use these devices to be able to use the communication technology and the smarts, local processing, local data collection, and then perhaps even feeding up into these larger networks to do other things. So just a few comments I wanted to make, that there's a lot of different disciplines, and in the IEEE field of interest of various societies, as Tim pointed out, that tie into all these ways we can work together. So I'd like to see, do any of you have any questions or comments you've got? I've got some things I wrote down for discussion, but I was curious what you folks are thinking about.
And that's what we need.
And that's what the other microphone is for, so we can record your comments. Thank you, Joe. Go ahead.
I happen.
No. It's not. It's a recording. It's for the recording. Yeah, leave it on. Yeah. Well, we won't hear you if you don't.
I'm Bob Gill. I just arrived from Vancouver.
Okay.
After we found out Obama was coming, and
he's not here yet. Go ahead.
Delighted to see the Internet of Things and the thought of bringing the entire world into Internet, and I appreciate your thought of powering up these devices is a big challenge for us. But you know, I also work in the Internet security side of things, and that's you know, we do these things for the good of humanity. But there are some other people who have different ideas. You know, that could create a problem. Any thoughts on the security side of things?
On the security side of things. Yeah. You want to comment, Joe?
Yeah. I spend a lot of my time working on Internet of Things connectivity. And to try to make a long story short, we are exposing our bodies, our houses, our cars to anybody in principle. So you want to make, there is such thing as levels of technical security. We can encrypt our communications so that people can't eavesdrop on them. We can develop keys between systems so that they're trustworthy in some fashion, and so that information can have message authentication fields attached so that we can determine whether or not we trust the source of the information that we get. We can have key generation sequences that are complicated enough that even our government is willing to trust them. having done, security can then apply to the link between a pair of devices. And security can also be enacted between applications. Suppose I have a very complicated system, and I've got a cell phone somewhere talking to the internet to something that's talking across the internet to something else that comes back down to a device. People are talking about this all the time. So you can have link level security, but you should also have what they call L7 application to application security. I work with some people who do systems like AllJoin, which is a software bus and allows you to put security application to application negotiated separately from link to link. In my opinion, to have security systems that are trustworthy, you have to make the link level and the applications level both mathematically strong enough so that the only remaining attack surface is to lie to somebody. All of us can get phished. All of us get tricked into revealing information to hackers. We can't make that problem go away unless we erase all of our brains. But if we make the system strong enough, that's the only remaining attack surface. Does that answer your question?
There's a question over here.
Is it me?
Yeah.
Yes, it is you.
So I'm actually going to disagree with you, Joe. So I think that the most compelling use cases we have heard for Internet of Things, the soil moisture sensor and the light switches in India, are actually more an intranet of things or local net of things, because there's absolutely no reason to connect them to the Internet as a whole, which is hard to see right now, the need for that. The second is that I think the security risk, the primary security risk, actually comes from in areas like home security and the personal activity monitors, not from somebody eavesdropping on your Fitbit, but from the companies that sell you these things trying to collect all sorts of personal data so that they can make money with it. So the question here is, are we really talking about an Internet of Things, or are we talking about the technology at first until the global network comes along, being all these disconnected little networks where nevertheless there is the potential for a tremendous benefit, but really you don't have the security risk or the need to have a lot of bandwidth to actually connect it to the internet.
So that's kind of like ad hoc networks.
Ad hoc networks.
The ad hoc networks or the edge computing. That's in other words, local rather than global.
Local rather than global.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of things like that, but there also may be things where, for instance, people on the ground might be able to gather information that then could be used to map out the situation on the ground, you know, if that was collected somewhere else. So there's a need for both the local communication, but also I think the possibilities for humanitarian or disaster type situations where you can have things that could also feed into a global network as well.
Global communication, now almost by your definition, that's not the Internet of Things, but that's people
Yes.
communicating with each other through the internet.
But it does tie into, because now I can do analytics and look at data and try to look for trends and things of that sort, which then may be useful to communicate back to people on the ground on what's going on, especially people who are trying to deal with an situation or inventing things on the ground to fix things. You know, fixers on the ground, or makers on the ground who actually are trying to cobble things together, for instance.
I'm just adding to it, and great you talked about the power, because I want to reach on you pledging IEEE to move to the wave, and I want to say Internet of Things, it looks like it's just for developed countries, Western countries. How about undeveloped countries? We don't have power or even internet to connect. I just want to think that in your presentation to make more involve other countries. I know you involved a lot in India, but other places, they don't have that concept. So Internet of Things is something new that will benefit a lot if you have some global, but local also, which they have some challenge of power. If
Right.
they don't have even the devices, that will be another idea to move on with Internet of Things?
So that's a very good question. So I think we need to develop solutions that are appropriate for each situation, right? So if we talk about wireless sensor nodes, and what can we do with that? One thing that I can think of is pollution monitoring, or look at things like, for example, in China, it's a big problem, pollution. So you could actually take a look at that and energize that community to come up with their own networks of IoT devices that is appropriate for what they believe is important.
Perhaps anonymously gathering information
Correct,
and sharing
correct.
it. Yes.
And
thinking that Kenya has pollution too,
China, yeah.
not to mention Mexico City.
Yeah, so pollution is a big thing, right? So things like we talking about water monitoring, I think it can help the farmers to become more productive, monitoring crops and other things. I think it's to everybody's benefit to solve some more fundamental need.
So I really appreciate that question, particularly because this has been, like I mentioned, like a big barrier to access for developing nations. And actually recently in the past couple of months, I've been helping a gentleman in Uganda develop a makerspace. And so he actually found me because of the soil moisture sensor that I put out online. And he bought a bunch of Raspberry Pis and is developing a local irrigation system within his community. But he did express difficulty because folks in Uganda don't have access to credit and they don't have access to advanced technologies. So there is definitely still a barrier to entry for a lot of people, but as technology gets cheaper and more available through different routes, most people hopefully within their community can find somewhere where they could order something from eBay. That'll help bridge those gaps.
Other questions, comments out there? There we go.
So we have been talking about Internet of Things for a few years now. And given the simplicity of deployment or the low cost and the potential that the Internet of Things has, one would expect that they would pervade us everywhere, at least in the developed countries, where resources is not a big deal. I understand that in certain countries there are barriers of entry, but at least in the developed countries, one would expect that the Internet of Things would be much more pervasive than it is now.
Well, there are people that have thermostats that are connected to the internet, and they control them through the internet, for example. You know,
This room doesn't have one.
Let's say,
This room doesn't have one.
and Google can then see what temperature you've got in your house. But you know, their devices. There's things that'll check for humidity and give you water. You know, water your plants, that kind of thing. There's you know, there are devices around here. It's in the early phases. The other thing, and this is the thing that Joe was getting at before, is that it's hyped up to do almost everything, and we don't yet know what it's really going to be good for in a sense. In other words, what ultimately will people want to do with what's called the Internet of Things, i.e., smart things that are connected together, you know, through wireless connections, you know, and what is going to be the thing that people really like to do it? There's some household appliances and things of that sort, your security camera, you know, your thermostat, things of that sort that might be useful, but you know, what is the thing that's really going to be interesting? Is it going to be a health, you know, fitness, right? Fitness devices, that's another essentially Internet of Thing type device. Is it going to be smart watches or things of that sort? Or is it going to be something we haven't even really thought of yet or haven't found the application for? Or a game. Or a game, yeah.
Typically in the Gartner's hype cycle, the peak of expectations is very short. But apparently for Internet of Things, it seems to be too long, prolonged.
It's too long.
The hype
yeah.
of, yeah. So I was wondering if there's any specific reason that we are missing.
Oh.
For,
Do you guys have any comments? You mean why is it so
Yeah.
hot?
yeah, why is it so hard for so long?
Well, it's because it's cool, you know. Other Joe, do you have any comment?
No, we were telling jokes.
Oh, okay.
So, any...
Oh, we got one over here. Go ahead.
Hello. Name is Reginald, and I didn't catch all of it, but I did read up a little bit on some of the projects here. I'm really excited about Internet of Things. And the question that the gentleman over there on the far right of the room presented with regard to concerns on cybersecurity, I think were well addressed by your response, specifically because one of the aspects, or one of the human aspects of these new technologies being migrated out are the access to the technologies that we become reliant on. Mm-hmm. So today, not everybody's reliant on Fitbits, but in the future, maybe we can picture a scenario where everyone has one, much like how everyone perhaps has a key fob today, or depends on smartphones today. And because of that, I think we do need to pay more attention to the trusted computing platform. And I would even assert that we need to expand that to the actual physical platform themselves, inasmuch as much of the processing or processor technology is being appropriated by nefarious sources. So just kind of pushing this volleyball back and forth a little bit, I would say that because we as innovators of these technologies, we need to begin to build it with security in mind, and to begin to think about the threats and vulnerabilities to our way of life and the ever-rising or ever-evolving flow of, so to speak, terrorism. How do we build technologies and build them safely? I think these are real questions. And when you think about Internet of Things, you know, Kaspersky last year put out an article saying that not only do we have the advent of the Internet of Things, but we have what we could consider the Internet of Threats.
So some comments on that. One of the ways I look at this Internet of Things, or all these things that are connected that we can have association with us, is these are becoming extensions of ourselves. You can think of them as sort of digital senses that we're creating. And I think the idea of doing this and perhaps combine this virtual reality and other things to create even a more immersive sense of combining sort of a cyber world that's connected, related to things around us, in addition to what we're doing ourselves. That essentially the Internet of Things is the extension of ourselves. It's sort of our social network is now also these things in addition to ourselves. Now, and I think that leads to this concept of personal collection, but anonymous sharing, right? And I think that that's got to be a key part of that we're going to be collecting stuff that's going to be useful to us, but if you are going to provide that kind of security, you need to somehow be able to share it and get value from the interaction with other people, that social interaction, but also preserve your anonymity where you wish to preserve that anonymity, that you don't give everything away. Right now, everything is given away. There's not, we don't have a lot of good security on these things. But I think you need to allow, that's kind of capabilities I think that we need to be creating.
Right, let me add to that. So I've talked about Bluetooth Low Energy a lot and security, and to echo one of your comments earlier about how some of the people who use this will be the corporations, right? So I carry a Fitbit around, and it keeps track of how active I am or I am not. There was one of my favorite cartoons that was in Dilbert a couple of years ago, and in it, in the first frame, Dilbert's boss gives him what appears to be a personal health sensor, a Fitbit. And Dilbert's like, oh, that's really nice. You care about my health. But in the third frame, the Catbert character is talking to the boss, and they're saying, that guy isn't breathing hard enough. Let's give him some more work. Now, I've been walking around CES show for a few years, and I've found people who've been for 10 years building little gadgets that fit on your shoes and keep track of how active you are. Those are used by corporations for the last 10 years to keep track of how active their employees are. And in fact, if they're lazing around, then those people get fired. For more than 10 years, they've been putting sensors on the top of trucks so they know how fast their drivers are and where those drivers are, and they can control and monitor the productivity of their drivers way more than they could 20 years ago. We should all get used to the fact that we're getting instrumented whether we like it or not. How many of you drive cars from General Motors? Not very many. The OnStar system knows where your car is all the time, if it's anywhere in cell phone range. It's a nice feature that if you get locked out of your car, you can call OnStar, they can unlock it for you. OnStar can also make the car stop if someone steals it, but they know where your car is. All these people renting cars, they now have connections to the cars so they can tell if you're speeding or not, and charge you. Expect someday that they're going to charge you if you drive too fast. Expect that if we have universal health insurance in the United States, eventually you're going to get a discount from your health insurance people if you consent to wear personal health monitoring things, and then they're going to start badgering you if you're not active enough. Get used to that. At least I'm concerned about it.
I definitely think that's a valid concern, particularly since there's that phrase, if you're not paying for a service, you are the service. So that is particularly true with services like Google, which are phenomenal and allow access to an incredible amount of resources, and we need that. But we also have to be aware as to how this information is being used and how it's being monetized. In terms of smartphones, there are a number of ways that our activities are tracked. Whether you agree with that or not, I think it's important that people are informed and aware of this. So as the Internet of Things comes about, it is definitely something that people need to keep in mind. What are we making public about ourselves? How can we anonymize it if we so choose to? And how can we protect ourselves from the variety of institutions around us that want to make us pay them money?
I got another one.
Since nobody answered General Motors, maybe I should ask how many drive Volkswagen. Anyhow, I'm sorry I didn't mean to drive the conversation towards security. Every good thing we do, comes with some fringe benefits as well as other threats and whatnot. But I think just to appreciate your talks, your presentations, the theme of this conference is humanitarian technology, and I think you've done a wonderful job, and IoT is here, it's coming, like it or not, it's there, and embrace it, or you'll be left behind. And I think the theme of that is to be able to provide access, provide knowledge, or access to knowledge to every possible human being that we can. So kudos to you guys.
Oh, thank you. I had one more question I think I wanted to ask, and that is, we talked about security, hiding stuff from other people, but you're in a humanitarian situation or a disaster situation or something like that, that may not be your first concern.
You want to be found, in fact.
You might want to be found, or you may want to get some help from outside. And so I think this ties into some of the things that Tim was talked about before. Is what do you guys see as our capabilities in the future, especially with connected things, to be able to use that to get help on the ground from people who are remote but maybe experts in different areas? Can you make any comments on that?
I think with all the technology that is available today and will be available in the future, including, I talk about satellites for communication, but there are many different satellite systems, right, for imagery, for weather. So things that can help do situational awareness. Right, so to find where the people that need help and for them to call out, that is a really important thing. That's exactly right. You want to be found. You want to tell, I need food to be dropped here. I need medical aid to be sent here. Don't send us, blankets because we don't need it because it's 100 degrees here. But those type of things that we generally get confused, right? I've heard these horror stories where they were dropping, winter clothing in a tropical zone because they weren't being told exactly what they need. They just thought, hey, this is standard care kit from the aid agency. So I think those type of things, we're trying to figure out how to have better communication and to make better use of it. Later we'll certainly be more happy to talk to you about what we intend to do with ham radio, which is already available technology today, and how we can use it in many developing areas.
That's true, and along that lines, ham radio and cell phones. Is there any interesting combination that could happen at that to allow some, because the ham radio guys generally have a fairly sophisticated capability. They can reach out distances to other people. Can you make any comments on that?
I think that's already probably demonstrated to have some sort of bridge where you can use the those links and then either rebroadcast it into a band that's useful for the cell phone or Wi-Fi or something. I think people have demonstrated that. And ultimately, even for the satellite solution that I mentioned, not many people are going to be afford the first or maybe the second generation satellite phone. But if we can have a base station that's set up in a village, that's gone down in power, and we can broadcast in space, and that now becomes a femtocell base station that anybody's cell phone can talk to. That immediately opens up standard handsets that can start talking again.
So maybe there's some way in which one could set up idea, best practices or manuals. If this happens, here's what you could do to create a communication network. Okay. This whole thing of making, and tying that into humanitarian things. What do you think is the future of that? How do you think the Internet of Things will, how do you think it ties the Internet of Things? What will people be doing in the future? What will making be like 10 years?
What will making be like 10 years from now? Whew, that is a heavy question. Well, I think it's really interesting to see the different platforms that people can share their projects on, and using those platforms you can adjust the software code. For example, on GitHub, you can fork someone's software and you can completely write your own on top of what they have. So it makes taking what other people have figured out and applying it to your own needs much, much easier. It also allows for communication on an unprecedented scale. So like I mentioned, I've been in communication with a gentleman who's building a makerspace in Uganda, and I've been able to provide him resources, information, and tips on how to get that going with what he has available in his own community. And that's only made possible because we both have, email. And yeah, exactly, because we can actually talk to each other. And so he can reach out to somebody, or anybody can reach out to somebody that they identify as doing the things that they want to do in their own community, and then actually talk to these people and get real advice from them. So I think that's incredibly valuable, and I think that we need to ensure that that continues.
You talked about data security and how you're the product. They collect data to you to commercialize, to monetize. But the flip side of that is, if you have access to, what is it, how do you say it, data without personal identifying information.
Anonymous information.
Anonymized data, and it's open access, you too can ask questions, do research, look for patterns.
Exactly.
And what's the likelihood of that happening?
Well, in my mind, that actually is, it's sort of the next stage of social networking. I've got all these things, and they're my things, and I can interact with them, but then I may want, so I can create actually models of myself, or, surrogates for myself, various other things you could do. But when I interact with the world, I don't want to give that away. I want to have some kind of way in which I could actually increase the metadata I have, the appreciation of things that my stuff is collecting, compare it with other people and get their opinion, have their feedback into it. So it's essentially an enhancement of social interaction.
But you mentioned health. Health is the big thing in this country, and as you look at the price of things increasing, healthcare is getting to 18, 20, 25% of GDP. Well, if somebody wants to say, well, what are things that impact healthcare? And if nobody has the interest of finding that out because it might cut into their profits, but somebody wants to cut their own personal health care costs, or wants to know why in their community health care is so expensive, they can actually start looking for some of those answers when some economic interests don't want to have those answers.
There is a value in sharing information, but there's probably ways which you can do that where you don't give the farm away.
Exactly.
You can create value, but you're not giving everything away. Yeah, you had. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I think he was first.
I'm sorry. So bringing it back to humanitarian causes. So I was in a workshop earlier this afternoon, and we were discussing refugee camps. And they discussed in particular, a refugee camp of Syrians. So you can imagine someone collecting health data and saying, okay, I've got males of between the ages of 15 and 40, and they're from Homs. If the Syrian government got that and said, you know, then if that is viewed as a potential threat, then who knows what they might do.
Yes. Another place where you may want to have some anonymity in the information that's shared.
Yeah, and protecting that information. So even if you're not identifying individuals, you're identifying, okay, these are men of, they could be soldiers, and they're from an area that was not in alignment with the Syrian government.
Well, and part of that's going to be, I mean, there's always got the human element of what it is. Somebody intelligent has to make decisions on what's getting shared. So you don't create targets in that case, for instance.
Or even, you're even in a non-conflict area, you're collecting information. This person has HIV, and then that person, if that information got out, then that person has a difficult time.
There's a lot of reasons not all of your information to get out to everybody. But there also is value for for people to be able to share some things, especially if they can do it where they're not identified. Yeah.
Actually, it was the same.
You should pass. What was it?
Yeah.
It was the same. Just a little bit different perspective is data security. As you said, we may find a way, but just want to talk about Internet of Things and privacy. When I can switch that switch, I said, I want to share my data if I have a problem to send it to my doctor, but that data, I don't want to send it to my life insurance to know that data I have a problem with my heart.
Right.
So, yeah. Same.
And on that subject, I was wrapping up.
Not yet. We got one guy over here. Had a question. Sorry. You're the next one. After this.
Just quickly,
Oh,
I think that part of the issue, so we're kind of already doing that. There is a transfer of health metrics between hospitals, between insurance companies, and between individuals. So within that, the intermediary individuals that are doing this data transfer have to be extremely, extremely careful. And actually, if that does get out, those people that are transporting the data can be held liable. So that's also something where the government can come in and kind of protect us in that sense and make it so that there are incentives to be private with sensitive information.
Oh, I mean, the whole area of cybersecurity, right? You look at the Sony company hack, the loss of information, data breaches from Target. All these are part of a much bigger problem besides IoT. And so if we live in this digital age, we're all vulnerable. And there's something that is a reality. Right now, you're talking about cyber warfare between countries, right? Between China and U.S. I mean, and many other countries. Many aspects. It's not just a loss of privacy. This is the new world we live in. We live in a cyber world.
It's perhaps not so much a question as just an observation from doing some projects in sub-Saharan Africa and observing that our idea of personal PII, personal identifiable information, is really, not really a concern or a concept at this point. And so I guess if we're thinking about applications and we're thinking about translating rich world tools to the poor world, so currently less of a barrier. I'm not saying that it won't become more of a barrier in the future, and we could certainly make up some stories about why it is or is not a problem for these people. But what some of my observations have been is that there's a lot less concern about how their information about them. They're actually the opposite. They see that they're more focused on the value that it provides, and either in the healthcare space or in their how tracking their child or things like that. There's a lot of value. They're really focused on the value side of that. So it's not something I'm suggesting take advantage of from a personal side, but more it's an opportunity to explore further than you might currently in our rich world kind of perspective.
Okay, thanks. Was there another one over there? Or? Otherwise, we've got one over here, and that'll be our last one. How's that?
You? Last question.
Last call.
It was actually a comment based on what we were talking about regarding, loss of privacy and anonymity. The breaches that you spoke about with Target and Sony and a whole lot more recent ones. Here in the United States, I think one of the problems that we have not yet come to grips with is that regulation is behind in terms of the international standards. So we, here in the States, we're somewhat feeling the after effects of the internet, prostitution of the internet in terms of the internet bubble and making money off of the internet, where in Europe and European standards, not only were they first in developing standards for privacy, but that they currently lead the world in terms of developing these options to be able to turn the switch, as you were saying, say, hey, look, guess what? My confidentiality, my integrity, and my availability are all my choice. And so those are only recent innovations for our regulations here. And so I would challenge those who are developers of these technologies and solutions to include not just security, but regulation and its effect on these technologies, and how can we create laws and guidelines, regulations that would help us implement these so that it creates a safe environment for the users, the end users, in the end.
Thank you very much. And I think that's all the time we've got today. We actually used up all of our time.
Yep.
So thanks, everybody. Joe's What's Next?